Tennyson versus Invincible, two young heroes who'd end up as the greatest protectors of their respective Earths, with Mark by the end of the series being the strongest viltrumite, while Ben by the end of his own series has taken down pretty much every major threat in his universe. And I think thematically this matchup fits very well since we see them develop as heroes, with Ben going from an immature brat to an actual man, while Mark was a boy who always dreamed of being a hero, and is now currently dealing with becoming the monster his father wanted him to be. However, both heroes rise through every trial and error and remain to be the greatest superheroes to ever walk their planet. Now, for this video, we will be using the show for Invincible, while Ben will be in his Alien Force era, as these are two versions of the characters I never get to go over. Plus, we have 3 seasons to cover for both characters. I know season 3 isn't technically fully out for Invincible, but I'll give a rough estimation as to where Mark would be hypothetically by the end of that season. And I feel like this makes the scaling more interesting rather than me just always bringing up that one feat of the 3 viltrumites running through a planet over and over and over again every time I make an Invincible scaling video. Anywho, we'll start with Invincible as his new season just came out recently. We know going into season 3, Mark has gotten 138% stronger, 65% faster, and 70% more endurance. We'll use this to apply upscaling from previous feats in the other 2 seasons. This infamous scene of Omni Mans wiping out that planet full of aliens was calculated to be around small country level, and I believe Mark would scale to this feat, as Mark, while not holding back, is able to fight viltrumites who are harming Nolan not being casual. Some of you may mention the season 1 finale, but I mean, I believe both characters were holding back on one another, so I don't think this is all that relevant for scaling. And this is a feat, mind you, Omni Mans performed super casually, so I believe we could apply this to Mark as well. And due to him being 1.38 times stronger, we can say that Mark could at least generate 1.4 teratons of TNT. But even with that in mind, I'll compare that scaling to Ben's other stuff when we get there. Anywho, this is as far as we can take Mark's full power, but when he's on a more casual level, I'd say he's at least generating over 1.3 gigatons. I'm getting this number based on his casual meteor stopping feat, and I basically took that value and multiplied it with Mark's new power boost. So when Mark is suppressed, he's around large mountain level, but when he's not holding back, he can generate enough energy to destroy country. As far as his speed goes, there are multiple feats sprinkled throughout the show that suggest Invincible is bare minimum relativistic to even faster than light. Mark and Omni Mans playing catch and Mark traveling to the moon within a few seconds have both been calced at sub-relativistic to even 0.3% the speed of light. But the best speed scaling in my opinion comes from Nolan, who can travel to a planet multiple galaxies away. Based on the time frame Nolan had, this would put him at around 32 million times the speed of light. Now Mark, when he isn't holding back, does scale to Nolan at least in AP. However, I don't know if I can say that's the same for speed, especially as of right now in the series where Mark, in all honesty, is not on Omni Mans tier when it comes to speed. It's up to you if you want to apply this feat to Mark or not, but I think it's interesting to keep in mind for the discussion. I think for the show's continuity, to say he's moving at the speed of light is not far-fetched to say, but I can't confidently say that he's combating and reacting at 32 million times the speed of light in the show. As far as hacks goes for the viltrumite, he has knowledge of close quarters combat, regeneration, resistance to mind control, electrical based attacks, and can't die to things like radiation, poison, or cold and hot temperatures. And of course, with the ability to baby rage, he can increase his power exponentially. Mark Grayson is the strongest superhero Earth has to offer, but how does he compare to the hero of heroes? Tennyson, during his time in Alien Force, developed into probably the most mature version of the character. Not only has he learned to be a hero on his own, but he's learned similarly to Mark that he has to take the villains down, not out, or else he'll be no better than the evil he takes down. This version of Ben as well has some of his most iconic and underrated aliens that I don't really get to speak on. Diamond Head by this point of the series is one of Ben's strongest aliens, with him being capable of bringing down Vilgax. What's interesting to note about this Vilgax is that he's actually 10 times stronger than the one from the original series. You know, the same one capable of scarring way big, which would in all honesty put him above the likes of Cannonball. And this is the same alien who is capable of stopping a world-ending threat. Even if you don't like this line of scaling, within the Ben 10 community, there are calculations for Echo suppressing a nuclear grenade and Big Show freezing the null void, with both coming out to around island and country level. The null void feat arguably could be higher as well, as the void is infinite in size, but I feel like that's kind of nerdy to bring up in a conversation when I'm trying not to glaze one character over the other. We even have aliens like Goop being capable of pulling a planet together with the kinetic energy coming out to around 1.6 exaton, which for reference is enough energy to wipe out continents. This GOAT alien, this ultimate slept-on king who listens to Lucky, can produce enough energy to wipe out continents. And of course we have his other GOAT aliens that do kind of scale to each other, like Chromastone, Swamp Fire, and even Humongasaur. These guys at least somewhat harm Vilgax, so they should be significantly stronger than the old one. And they should be at least upscaling from weaker feats like forearms being able to crack the outer shell of the big tick. Ben suppresses himself like Mark, which is why he gets caught lacking by things he usually shouldn't be, but it's the same reason Invincible gets caught off guard as well and loses a lot. He doesn't want to kill people, that's not his style. So Ben's AP is kind of all over the place, but I think when he goes all out, he can definitely stop threats that are capable of threatening the world. Now as far as speed goes, even guys like Kevin are reacting to beams of light at point blank range, with calculations putting him at over 1.1 times the speed of light. All of Ben's aliens should upscale from this, with the likes of Jetray being far faster than this. This has been speed alien of course, so it may not come as a surprise to you that he's a lot faster than this, with his greatest feat being able to jump into hyperspace. This bare minimum requires Ben to be moving at massively faster than light speeds, which would give him speed to at least contend with Mark's higher ends. Even aliens like Jetray and Chromastone can shoot beams of light that probably move faster than light, since they're combating and tagging characters faster than light. It sounds kind of crazy, but when you think about it and put it into perspective, it does kind of make sense. As far as hacks goes, Ben has a lot of abilities to pick and choose from. He can shoot fire and plant-based moves with Swamp Fire, maybe even put them to sleep. Big Chill can freeze and phase through Invincible, allowing him to freeze him inside out. Brainstorm has electricity. Echo has sound-based moves, which we do know would come in handy, especially after the recent episodes that dropped. He could pummel him with Humongasaur, shoot beams and absorb energy with Chromastone, and technically can't die with him. There's also Goop and Big Chill's intangibility, along with the other OG aliens that Ben could choose from. And of course, there is always the funny idea of Ben scanning Mark's DNA, which I know a lot of you are probably curious about. Which I will say is technically possible, given the fact that Mark is part alien, and the Omnitrix may just scan the viltrumite DNA and put it into his watch, allowing him to become somebody even stronger than Mark himself. But I think we can talk more about that in the fight scenario, so let's get that out of the way. We'll say for this scenario, Mark and Ben for some reason get into a squabble over beating up some fodder D-lister, leading into the public then telling them to fight each other. We'll say that this is Alien Force Season 3 Ben, so he's kind of in his bag, and this leads into him deciding to play around, and, you know, him and Mark would decide to fight each other. He would first flex as Humongasaur to try and match Mark in power, which leads into Mark easily being able to do so. Ben would try to smack him with his tail, but Mark would proceed to throw him into the ground, telling him to stand down before he gets serious. And now these two start getting progressively more and more mad at each other, with Ben using Big Chill to try and insta-freeze him. He would try and make a funny joke about him needing to chill out, but Mark would manage to break out of the ice. This was because Ben wasn't trying to fully subdue Mark, but Mark would take advantage of this and try and pummel Big Chill. But as Mark rushes in for another punch, Big Chill would phase through him, freezing Mark's hand and allowing Ben to switch into Jetray. This would allow Ben to blitz and tackle Invincible into the ground, and by this point Mark would have suffered some pretty critical damage. Considering Big Chill's feat in the null void bare minimum is almost 30 times stronger than Mark's best feat, with the only reason that he isn't dead being that Ben doesn't want him to be, Mark at this point would try to not hold back, and he would just completely lose his cool. But Ben would decide to calm the situation down by turning into Goop. He'd perform a similar move to the best Buy Martian Manhunter that fought Omni Man and restrain Mark completely. And based off the feat that I mentioned with Goop earlier, there's actually no way Mark could overpower him, and he'd just give in or probably suffocate if it truly came to that. Ben doesn't like to kill people, but if he has to do it, he isn't necessarily afraid to do so. But I think more than likely he'd just incapacitate Mark, allowing him to secure the W. Now, for those who want to mention the MFTL and potential planet level scaling for Mark because he's going to fight Conquest, I don't think this really matters too much, as Ben worst case scenario could just turn into way big or one of his stronger aliens and overwhelm him. And we know Jetray as well is definitely way faster than 32 million times the speed of light, considering he's traveling through an infinite-sized universe within a finite amount of time, meaning Jetray may just damn well be infinitely faster than Mark. We also know, at least in this adaptation of Invincible, Consistently, he's probably in those low end faster than light ranges, meaning characters like Chromastone and even Jetray's laser beams are probably going to be able to tag Mark. Now, I will say Ben definitely has ways he could lose here. If he goes Brainstorm or even tries the overpowering route with Humongasaur, Mark could easily take advantage and just yoink bro into space. However, Ben not only could turn into an alien that could survive and breathe in space, but even worst case scenario, turn into a viltrumite himself. I think this would more than likely happen if this was a Ben 10 episode and he just gets a new alien so Wyatt could sell toys and ruin my franchise. But in a normal versus battle, I don't think Ben would just immediately go for the DNA scanning. More than likely would probably just restrain him with Goop or something and die the situation down. Regardless though, I believe Ben is taking down Invincible. These two characters though realistically would get along, and a crossover between these two would go absolutely hard. Anywho, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next versus battle.